The 2021 winter blackout in Texas, if you remember that, serves as a stark reminder that even if you think something will, quote unquote, never happen, it can and will. A lot of people think that about prepping, that we're preparing for something that's never going to happen. That storm left over 4.5 million homes and businesses without electricity for days and claimed about 700 lives in that time frame, which most of those people were probably entirely caught off guard or probably said, that's never going to happen here, and didn't bother learning about these things that we're talking about today. That storm didn't stop in Texas either. That winter storm, I believe it was called Uri, affected more than 170 million people across the United States, with power cuts hitting around 10 million people. The chances of facing such a severe blackout might seem remote, and it might be remote, but the collateral damage can be catastrophic, which makes these preparations crucial. As preppers, we try to think about every possible disaster situation or emergency there is and prepare for that. And in those disasters or emergencies, a power outage or a grid down event is possible in just about all of those. You have extreme weather conditions like hurricanes, tornadoes, winter storms, and even heat waves that can put massive stress on the electrical grid. You've got aging infrastructure, equipment failure, human error that could cause power outages from a few hours to possibly a few days. Then you've got intentional acts, whether that be from vandalism or terrorism. And then you've got demand surges and rolling blackouts that we could see happening more and more often these days. You've got electricity use that exceeds the supply during extreme hot and extreme cold. And then in extreme cases, you have EMPs, CMEs, military conflicts, and even domestic disputes that could take down the power grid for an extended period of time. Even shorter term power outages, like 12 hours or so, have created systemic problems like traffic chaos, banking and shopping issues being non-existent, hospital evacuations and closures, and even civil disorder or civil unrest. So while these short power outages can just cause headaches, a multi-day outage can shut down water stations, sewage systems, supermarkets, gas stations, banks, cell phones, the internet, basically everything. Everything we do in our daily lives revolves around electricity in one way or another. And in a situation like that, the longer something goes on, the more it becomes life-threatening. In this video, I want to talk about what exactly you need to prepare for any of these longer term power outages or even the short term. I'll go over everything from water storage solutions to backup power options that match your budget and your needs. A power outage does more than just leave you in the dark. An extended blackout disrupts modern life in a lot of different ways. Food and water become problems right away. The fridge keeps your food safe, but only for about 4 to 6 hours or so without power. A full freezer might stay cold for up to 48 hours or so, but that's if you don't open it. As far as water goes, homes with electric well pumps will lose water completely, and even these other homes if the pumping stations or the processing plants are shut down. Health and medical concerns also become an issue, especially for people who rely on power-dependent medical devices like oxygen concentrators, CPAP machines, and electric wheelchairs. Even some medications go bad without electricity. And also, the air quality inside homes deteriorates without proper ventilation and power. Communications break down because you've got cell towers that would probably not be working. You've got the internet, which would probably be down, and devices would eventually die. And this creates dangerous situations during emergencies when people need this information the most. Comfort and safety also gets worse without heating and cooling and puts the elderly people or even young people at risk during these extreme temperatures, which unfortunately is when a grid down or a power outage is more likely to happen. And also financial impacts add up because you might have spoiled food, you've got damaged appliances because of power surges, and property damage from frozen pipes or flooded basements. So there's a lot of different things that we need to think about other than having flashlights or keeping the lights on. So let's go over what some of these supplies that you'll need during a blackout are, whether you're talking about a blackout that lasts a few hours or a grid down event that lasts a few days or even weeks. Later in the video, we'll go over some of the larger scale power generation and storage options. But first off, let's talk about food, water, and first aid items. When it comes to food, we need to have those shelf-stable foods available. That is a staple of preparedness. The long shelf lives and something you can put on a shelf and it's going to last a while and your family's going to eat. The canned foods, the boxed foods, anything that doesn't require refrigeration and lasts for a long time. Refrigerated foods, these become an issue if you don't have a way to keep the refrigerator on, because after a few hours, that temperature rises and you don't want to be eating food that could get you sick in a situation like this. Because if the whole family's sick, not only do you have to worry about what you're going to do during a power outage, you've got to tend to them and care for them as well. And that's why it's also important to have medical supplies, and not just the first aid items, but the medications as well. When it comes to first aid, these are items that don't get used all that often. We probably open ours up a couple times a year, and one of those times is just to make sure everything in there is okay. But in a situation like this, if you do need it, you're going to be glad you have it. So medical supplies and these medications, whether they're over-the-counter medications or prescriptions, are very important. And when it comes to water, like I mentioned in the beginning, if you are on a well pump, that could be the only option getting that water out of the ground, is having some power. If you are in an urban or a suburban area or even apartment, you may want to have some of that water stored. And if you don't have enough room to store enough water, you need to think about your options as far as where to find water around you and have the water filters and all of those things. So while food, water, and medical supplies aren't power outage specific, they are important to have in this type of scenario and all types of scenarios. But just make sure you're thinking about that food, that water, and those medical supplies. Also, think about radios and flashlights and basically anything crank. Anything that you can get that has a hand crank could be really important, because you never know how long something is going to last. And when your batteries run out, you're going to want a way to still power that device up. They've got emergency radios that have the hand crank option, the solar option, as well as the battery options. I've got a Kato radio, which is a great radio, and it's got all three of those options. And that crank you can also use to generate a little bit of power and output that power to another device, say a cell phone or something like that. You've also got crank flashlights and battery flashlights, and while most of us probably have, 20 or so flashlights, it never hurts to have a couple of these that are the crank flashlights as well. And then you've got refrigeration options that you need to consider, because like I said earlier, your refrigerator, those foods might stay cold in there for 4 to 6 hours before you need to power that on and cool everything down again. And I will go over an option for that here in a little bit. So this is something that isn't going to need to be addressed immediately, but eventually it will. And you've also got to think about that the longer something goes on, the more unnecessary refrigeration is going to be. If you have gone through all the food that you have in your refrigerator and the grocery stores and everything, unless you have animals that you've raised yourself, you're not going to need refrigeration space for milk or juices or meat or frozen vegetables and things like that. Those will all be gone. So while we don't want to be throwing away a whole bunch of food, I think focusing solely on refrigeration being your main option in a power outage, not the right way to go, because eventually it's going to be pretty unnecessary. And then you've got cooking options. And I think with a grid down situation like this, one, you've got to think about foods, those pantry foods that we talked about earlier that don't require any cooking. The canned foods and the boxed foods that you can just open up and start eating. Maybe the canned foods that you can eat straight out of the can if you want, or you can heat those up a little bit by using an alcohol stove or a butane stove, something that you could use indoors that's not going to put off a lot of cooking smells, because in a longer term, and by longer term I mean just a couple of days, in a situation like that, those cooking smells are just going to alert the neighbors that you're eating when they might not be. Along with that, you've also got other options like our outdoor propane grills, which quite a few people have. And you've got the 20-pound propane canisters. And if you've got one extra of those will last a really, really long time. Again, you need to think about the cooking smells and your neighbors knowing that you have food when they don't. But outdoor propane grills are fantastic. You've even got rocket stoves that you can use outdoors, and even fireplaces inside, or wood burning stoves. But again, sending off smoke signals, sending off smells with that stuff. One of my favorite options is the butane stoves. I've got an Iwatani butane stove, which can be used indoor and outdoors. And the benefit of being able to cook indoors is it sort of masks that smell as well. And you're not, smoke isn't coming up through the chimney and all of those different things. So a butane stove is one of those things that's great to have in a situation like this, and can also be used any time of the year. And expanding on these different cooking options and even staying warm, you need to think about different fuel types. Whether you are talking about just about firewood to keep the fireplace on, or the butane stoves, the propane grills, the alcohol stoves, denatured alcohol, all of those different types of fuel that you'll want to have stored in an event you've got a blackout that lasts longer than a few hours, and a blackout that is in the middle of a heat wave or the middle of a blizzard or hurricane, some severe weather events. Even gasoline stored with some fuel stabilizer is important as well, because you never know when you're going to need to be able to evacuate. And if you got generators and things like that, we're going to talk about next, if you have those, you're going to need fuel to refill those. So if you've got a dual fuel generator, that's great. Make sure you have enough propane, make sure you have enough gasoline. If you've got these indoor cooking options, make sure you've got all the fuel that you would need for those as well to last you a little while at the very least. And like I said, with the generators, there are a number of different options as far as power sources go. You've got batteries, the regular AA's, AAA's, rechargeable batteries that go in flashlights and radios and a few different types of devices. You've got generators that will give you power in a shorter term situation. Again, sort of like the cooking smells, you may not want to have that generator running in the middle of the night, because if you are sleeping and you've got that generator and your room is nice and cozy, somebody may come and steal that generator, or somebody may come and steal what you have. So you've got to be careful about those as well. You've also got Life PO4 batteries where you can store some of this energy, and even power stations that you could use, from the really small power stations to the really large power stations. But all of these would be able to power small electronics and even some larger things like a hot plate for 5 or 10 minutes if you wanted to boil some water. But these are good options and important options to have. And if solar is an option for you, if you get enough sunlight to make a solar feasible, you'll want to have some solar panels and things like that as well to regenerate some of this power, because when the grid is down, there's not a whole lot of ways to do this. If you live by a river that's fast flowing, maybe you could do some hydropower or wind power, which isn't very efficient. But if that is an option, you could do that as well. And if you don't have a way to regenerate some of this power, you need to think about ways to store more of this power beforehand. And also, you've got camping supplies. And what I do is I tried to keep some of my camping supplies that are preparedness related separated from everything else, which honestly, just about everything you can think of with camping supplies is preparedness related, whether you're talking about fishing poles, hatchets, knives, things like that. But what I do is I have a separate bin that I keep some of the light sources in, the Coleman stove, a 2-man tent, a sleeping bag, things like that I keep in this bin. That way I can just go out to the garage, and it's sort of like a lights out kit, although it doesn't have extension cords and things like that. It's sort of like a lights out kit right there all by itself. So I can grab that bin and bring it inside. It's got everything that I might need. If you don't go camping and you don't have a lot of preparedness supplies, maybe go to Walmart or the sporting goods store and just check it out and see what they have, and think about what some of these supplies that you might want to get just to have just in case in a blackout or a grid down type situation. We can't expect to power everything in our house that we do on a regular basis. If you looked at your electricity bill, you'll see that you use far more electricity than you could possibly generate, most people anyway. That's why we need to calculate our power needs and then figure out what sort of power devices we need, whether they're large power stations or LiFePO4 batteries, things like that. Once you figure out your power needs, then you can go from there and figure out how you're going to power those. I recently did a video talking about some of these larger supplies that you might need in a grid down situation, from multiple power stations to larger power stations themselves, and even just LiFePO4 batteries. Make sure and watch that video here because it'll not only help you calculate your power needs, it'll show you what some of those options are. With that, I am done here today. Take care and prepare, everyone. We will talk to you in the next video.